Hey everyone, it's me, Rai, and today I'm going to show you how to use art masking fluid. Thanks to my cousin Tatiana, who wanted to know how to use this. I'm using Winsor Newton art masking fluid, and you'll see it has a little bit of yellow pigment on the bottom. It is made from natural rubber latex. If you're allergic to those kind of materials, just be warned that some people could have irritation if they're allergic to that. I'll just pour a little out in a tiny little bottle. Sometimes I'll paint right out of the little container, but in this case, I just want to show you kind of the viscosity of it. It is pretty watery, but it starts to dry pretty fast. Important thing to keep in mind is to use an old brush. You don't want to be ruining a new brush, so I always have these cheap this is a Winsor Newton University brush. It's kind of their student line of brushes, and they're great for doing things like this where you're not going to be bothered if it gets ruined. It only costs a few bucks. I'm going to dip in my brush and I'm going to start painting in a little bit of areas that I want to mask off white. So it's basically like masking tape, but in a liquid form. It's latex, so it's going to dry and it's going to be kind of rubbery and it's going to protect the white of the paper. So I did a couple different textures. I splatter painted, I did some lines, I did some abstract work. It's really good if you want to do like fine line work and to mask off white, because sometimes it's very hard to paint around things like letters or something like that. So I also wrote Rai as well. I wipe off my brush right after, and then I'm going to go straight into blow drying it really well, and once it's thoroughly dried, you can paint right over it. You can notice already that it's already resisting the paint because it's rubbery. So it's resisting the paint, but it is not made to leave on the paper. You're going to want to remove it once your watercolor is dry. You can just let it air dry, but I will let you know that it will take a little longer to dry than usual when you have it on the art masking fluid. Because it's rubber, the watercolor isn't kind of going into the paper. So anywhere where you paint over the masking fluid, just make sure that's thoroughly dried. That's why I like to blow dry it a little, just to make sure everything's dry. So when I touch it like this to peel it off, I'm not going to be spreading any wet paint anywhere. And it's really satisfying to peel off. You can peel it off with a clean finger. I would recommend using like a white eraser to kind of lift it off, just so you don't get your finger oils on the paper or the painting. You'll be left with really crisp edges, as you can see here. So it's great if you're doing watercolor of like and you want little snowflakes or some fine line work and abstract work. You could erase it out. This almost looks like reflections of water. So you could get some really cool effects with it. Sometimes you don't want the really harsh edges of a masking fluid, so you can always go back in and soften the edges, or even just soften the whole shape as well, and actually do that a lot. So you can see here, I'm kind of melting the edges, and it gives a lot more depth. So you don't just have to use it in a very flat way. You could actually blend out the objects a little more. In this case, you could also paint on top of watercolor. So I painted this kind of wet into wet, painted in like little stars, blow dried it really well, and then I'm going in with some Payne's gray, and it's going to resist all those little dots, and I'll be able to peel them off after, and you'll get a nice clean stars or gravel or whatever you're painting. If I wanted it to be stars, I might want to lighten some up or darken some up. So I could take my brush, just a damp brush, and kind of melt it again, remember? So you could kind of get rid of those really stark white lights, and you could kind of subdue them in a way, even though you're using masking fluid. In this example, I'm masking off little windows on a very saturated background. I blow dried it pretty well, and then I'm going over it again, and you can see it's resisting all the areas I painted out the windows, so I could peel that off. And this would have been a little bit more painstaking if I had to paint around all those windows, but instead I painted the windows in with masking fluid, masked off that bright orange, and then I was able to remove it after, and it just makes some aspects of watercoloring a lot more easy. If you're curious how I use it in my art, you could see in this portrait I did, the background little splatters of water are actually masked off paper, still showing through the watercolor. After it dried, I painted over it with the blues, did a wet into wet, and then I peeled it off and you got this really stark whites. Here's an example of how I used to mask off all the little white stripes, and then I painted the shadows and details in the stripes after the masking fluid was removed. If you want to see a video of me painting the lionfish and how I use the art masking fluid, I posted that video on YouTube as well, so you can check it out. Let me know if you have any questions about any of the materials. I'd love to do more videos for you.